7 Ways to be Miserable for the Rest of Your Life, according to Charlie Munger. The late Charlie Munger built much of his thinking around a concept he called inversion. Instead of asking how to build a great life, he liked to ask the opposite question first. He believed failure is often easier to map than success. Once the failure path is visible, the job is simple. You walk the other ways. In his 1986 Harvard School commencement speech, later printed in Poor Charlie's Almanac, Munger borrowed 3 ideas from Johnny Carson and bolted on 4 of his own. Together, they form a complete blueprint for wasting a life and being miserable. Below is that blueprint and what it actually teaches us about living well. 1. Ingest chemicals to alter your mood. Smart men go broke 3 ways: liquor, ladies, and leverage. Charlie Munger. Munger treated Johnny Carson's first prescription for misery as a warning, not a tip. Leaning on substances to chase a high or numb, a low never actually fixes anything underneath. The relief fades fast, and the habit it builds tends to outlast whatever pain it was supposed to solve. People who use chemicals to manage their feelings often lose the ability to face those feelings head-on. That avoidance becomes the real problem. It usually ends up worse than the suffering they were trying to relieve in the first place. 2. Feed your envy. Envy is a really stupid sin because it's the only one you could never possibly have any fun with. There's a lot of pain and no pleasure. Charlie Munger. Munger called envy the most unique form of human vice. Gluttony at least hands you a moment of pleasure. Greed at least delivers something material. Envy gives you nothing but resentment towards someone else's good fortune, with no payoff to balance the cost. Someone consumed by envy spends their attention tracking other people's wins instead of building their own. There's always somebody with more. That comparison never runs out, which means the dissatisfaction never does either. 3. Hold on to resentment. There are 2 things I have noticed in a long life that really do enormous damage to the bearer. One of them is resentment and the other is hatred. What good is it going to do you to have this vast resentment of the way the world is? Charlie Munger. Carson's 3rd prescription, adopted by Munger, is straightforward. Nurse every grudge. Replay every slight. Let old wounds sit and rot for years. The person carrying the resentment suffers the whole time. Meanwhile, the target of that grudge often forgets the incident entirely and moves on without a second thought. Letting go of old scores is one of the most practical things a person can do for their own peace, since the anger costs the angry person far more than it costs anyone else. 4. Be completely unreliable. Faithfully do not do what you have engaged to do. You will counteract all your virtues and be outpaced by mediocre turtles. Charlie Munger. Munger described unreliability as a kind of handicap that cancels out every other virtue a person might have. Talent, charm, and intelligence don't count for much if people can't trust you to follow through on what you said you'd do. A reliable person becomes valuable just by showing up consistently. An unreliable one, no matter how gifted, eventually gets cut out of the best places and the best opportunities. Trust is the floor everything else gets built on, and once it's gone, nothing else matters much. 5. Learn only from your own experience. If at first you don't succeed, well, so much for hang gliding. Charlie Munger. Munger used that line to make a serious point. Some mistakes are so costly that you don't get a second shot to learn from them yourself. That is exactly why studying other people's failures matters so much. Refusing to read history or absorb lessons from the people who came before you is a guaranteed way to repeat mistakes that were already solved decades ago. Munger spent a lifetime reading biographies and case studies for one simple reason. Borrowed wisdom is cheaper than the wisdom you have to buy yourself the hard way. 6. Go down and stay down. Munger believed severe setbacks happen to everyone eventually. Nobody gets to skip that part. The real difference between a miserable life and a resilient one is whether a person gets back up afterward. Staying down after the first big loss locks a person into permanent defeat, even when the original setback wasn't that severe. Munger's own life included real financial losses and real personal tragedy. He kept building businesses and investing anyway decade after decade. 7. Never invert the problems. Invert always invert. Carl Jacobi, a favorite Munger quote. Munger loved that line because it captured inversion in a single image. Most people only think forward. They ask what they need to do to succeed and skip the much simpler question of what would guarantee their failure. Refusing to think backward means walking straight into traps that could have been spotted years in advance. Munger's whole investment approach started with one question: what destroys value? Only after answering that did he ask what creates it. Conclusion. Munger's 7 prescriptions for misery work as a map because they are specific. Chemical escape: envy. Resentment. Add unreliability, isolated thinking, quitting after failure, and a refusal to think backward, and you have a complete formula for wasting a life. The reverse path is just as clear, even if it asks more of you day to day. Stay sober-minded. Root for other people's wins instead of resenting them. Let old grudges go. Keep your word even when it costs you something. Study the mistakes of the people who came before you instead of insisting on learning everything firsthand. Get back up after every fall, no matter how many times it takes. Ask what could go wrong before it happens, not after. None of this calls for genius. It calls for the discipline to walk the opposite direction of the 7 habits Munger laid out, one choice at a time, for the rest of your life. For more about your personal development, consider to subscribe and hit the notification bell.